The antique wardrobe loomed before me, its dark wood gleaming in the dim light of the royal bedchamber. I never imagined that my position as a chambermaid would lead me to uncover secrets that could shake the very foundations of the palace. But as I reached for the ornate handle, a chill ran down my spine, as if the wardrobe itself was whispering a warning. My name is Lucy Thorne, and I've served in this grand palace for just over a year. It's a place of opulence and grandeur, where every corridor echoes with centuries of history. But today, as I went about my usual duties, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The task seemed simple enough: organize Her Royal Highness's wardrobe before the upcoming gala. I'd done it countless times before, my fingers deftly sorting through silks and velvets, arranging jewels and tidying shoes. But as I swung open the heavy wardrobe doors, a faint glimmer caught my eye. There, nestled in the folds of a rarely worn gown, lay an antique locket. Its golden surface was dulled with age, intricate filigree work barely visible beneath a layer of tarnish. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the piece. It was my duty to report any misplaced valuables, but something about this locket called to me. With trembling fingers, I lifted it from its resting place. It was heavier than I expected, and as I turned it over in my palm, I could feel the weight of its secrets. The clasp was stubborn, resisting my attempts to open it. But as I applied gentle pressure, it finally gave way with a soft click that seemed to echo in the quiet room. Inside, I found a faded photograph and a name etched in delicate script: Elizabeth. My breath caught in my throat. Elizabeth? But that was impossible. The current queen's name was Victoria, and I knew of no Elizabeth in the recent royal lineage. As I stared at the unfamiliar face in the photograph, a gust of wind swept through the room, causing the heavy curtains to billow. I jumped, nearly dropping the locket. The palace had always felt alive in a way, but at that moment, it seemed to be holding its breath, watching me. I knew I should close the locket, return it to its hiding place, and forget I'd ever seen it. But curiosity burned within me, a flame that wouldn't be extinguished. Who was Elizabeth, and why was her locket hidden away in the queen's wardrobe? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. Panic seized me, and I quickly clasped the locket around my neck, hiding it beneath my uniform. Just as I closed the wardrobe doors, a sharp knock rang out. "Come in," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. The door creaked open, revealing the stern face of Mrs. Holloway, the head housekeeper. Her shrewd eyes scanned the room before settling on me. "Lucy, Her Majesty requires additional linens for tonight's dinner. See to it immediately." I nodded, grateful for the excuse to leave the room. As I hurried past Mrs. Holloway, I could have sworn I saw her gaze linger on my neck, where the locket lay hidden. But when I glanced back, she was already turning away, her face impassive as ever. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. The palace was abuzz with preparations for the upcoming gala, and I threw myself into my work, trying to distract myself from the weight of the locket against my skin. But every so often, I'd catch myself touching it through my dress, reassuring myself that it was still there. As night fell, I finally retreated to my small room in the servants' quarters. With shaking hands, I removed the locket and examined it more closely. The photograph showed a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with a gentle smile and eyes that seemed to hold a secret. She bore a striking resemblance to the current queen, but there was something different about her, a softness that I'd never seen in Her Majesty's stern countenance. I ran my finger over the engraved name. Elizabeth. The name tugged at something in my memory, a half-forgotten whisper I'd once overheard. But try as I might, I couldn't recall the context. A soft knock at my door made me start. I quickly hid the locket under my pillow before calling out, "Yes?" The door opened to reveal Tom, one of the footmen and my closest friend in the palace. His usually cheerful face was creased with concern. "Lucy, are you all right? You seemed distracted at dinner." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired from all the preparations." Tom's eyes narrowed slightly, unconvinced. "Are you sure? You know you can tell me anything, right?" For a moment I was tempted to confide in him, to share the burden of my discovery. But something held me back. The secret of the locket felt too big, too dangerous to share, even with Tom. "I know," I said softly. "Thank you, Tom. I think I just need some rest." He nodded, though I could see the worry lingering in his eyes. "All right. Sleep well, Lucy. And be careful, yeah?" As the door closed behind him, a shiver ran through me. Be careful. Did he know something? Or was it just a general caution in a place where walls had ears and secrets could be deadly? I retrieved the locket from under my pillow, studying it once more in the flickering candlelight. As I did, I noticed something I'd missed before: a tiny clasp on the side of the locket. With bated breath, I pressed it, and a small compartment sprang open. Inside was a folded piece of paper, so thin and delicate it seemed it might crumble at my touch. With utmost care, I unfolded it, revealing a message written in faded ink. "My dearest Elizabeth, our love may be forbidden, but it is eternal. No matter what happens, know that my heart belongs to you always. Forever yours, J." My heart raced as I read the words. A forbidden love? Involving someone named Elizabeth who looked remarkably like the Queen. The implications were staggering. As I folded the note and returned it to its hiding place, I knew sleep would not come easily tonight. I had stumbled upon a secret that could potentially shake the very foundations of the monarchy. But more than that, I had discovered a love story, hidden away for who knows how long. Tomorrow, I vowed, I would begin my search for answers. Who was Elizabeth? Who was Jay? And why was their love forbidden? Little did I know, my quest for the truth would lead me down a path far more dangerous and twisted than I could have ever imagined. As I blew out the candle, plunging my room into darkness, the locket seemed to pulse against my skin, a silent reminder of the secrets now entrusted to me. In the shadows, I could almost hear the whisper of long-forgotten voices, urging me forward into a mystery that would change my life forever. Sleep eluded me that night, my dreams filled with shadowy figures and whispered secrets. When dawn finally broke, I rose with a sense of purpose, the weight of the locket a constant reminder of the mystery I had stumbled upon. As I made my way through the winding corridors of the palace, everything seemed different. The opulent tapestries and gleaming suits of armor that I had passed 100 times before now felt like silent sentinels, guarding long-buried secrets. Even the morning light filtering through the stained glass windows cast eerie shadows that seemed to dance and whisper. My first task of the day was to assist in preparing the Grand Library for the Queen's morning reading. As I dusted the ancient tomes and straightened the plush velvet curtains, my eyes kept wandering to the rows upon rows of books. Surely, if there were answers to be found about Elizabeth and the mysterious Jay, they would be here. But how could I search without arousing suspicion? As if in answer to my unspoken question, Mrs. Holloway's voice rang out behind me, making me jump. "Lucy, Her Majesty has requested a specific volume for her reading this morning. The Lineage of the Crown, by Sir Edward Blackthorne. Fetch it at once." I nodded, grateful for the excuse to peruse the shelves. As Mrs. Holloway's footsteps faded away, I began my search, my fingers trailing over the spines of countless books. Many were histories of the royal family, and I found myself pausing, pulling out volumes at random, scanning their contents for any mention of an Elizabeth. Finally, I found the requested book, a massive tome bound in deep green leather. As I lifted it from the shelf, something fluttered to the floor, a loose page, yellowed with age. I quickly snatched it up, my heart racing as I recognized the same delicate handwriting from the note in the locket. My dearest Jay, the walls have ears, and I fear our time grows short. Meet me in the rose garden at midnight. We must make our decision. With all my love, Elizabeth. I quickly tucked the note into my pocket, my mind reeling. The rose garden, I knew it well, a secluded spot on the eastern side of the palace grounds. But what decision were they facing, and why did Elizabeth fear they were running out of time? Lost in thought, I nearly collided with Tom as I exited the library. "Whoa there!" He steadied me, his hands lingering on my shoulders a moment longer than necessary. "You're in a hurry this morning." I managed a weak smile, all too aware of the stolen note burning a hole in my pocket. "Just trying to stay ahead of Mrs. Holloway's endless list of tasks." Tom's brow furrowed. "Are you sure you're all right, Lucy? You've seemed distracted lately." For a moment, I was tempted to confide in him. Tom had been my friend since my first day at the palace, his easy smile and kind eyes a constant source of comfort. But the memory of the note's warning, "The walls have ears," held me back. "I'm fine, really," I assured him, forcing brightness into my voice. "Just a bit overwhelmed with all the preparations for the gala." Tom nodded, though I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me." As he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already in over my head. But there was no turning back now. The day passed in a blur of duties, my mind constantly wandering to the locket and the mysterious notes. As dusk fell, I found myself in the Queen's private sitting room, arranging flowers in a crystal vase. The room was a testament to royal opulence, with gilt-edged mirrors and priceless artwork adorning every wall. My eyes were drawn to a particular painting, a portrait of a young woman in a flowing blue gown, her eyes bright with laughter. There was something hauntingly familiar about her face. "Beautiful, isn't she?" I whirled around to find the Queen herself standing in the doorway, her keen eyes fixed on the portrait. I dropped into a hasty curtsy, my heart pounding. "Yes, Your Majesty," I managed to stammer. The Queen moved further into the room, her gaze never leaving the painting. "My great-aunt Elizabeth," she said softly, almost to herself. "They say she was the jewel of the court in her day." Elizabeth. My hand instinctively went to the locket hidden beneath my uniform. Could it be the same woman? What happened to her, Your Majesty?" I dared to ask, hardly believing my own boldness. A shadow passed over the Queen's face. "A tragic tale, I'm afraid. She died young, under mysterious circumstances. It caused quite the scandal at the time." Before I could ask anything more, the Queen seemed to remember herself. Her expression hardened, the momentary vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "That will be all," she said curtly, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. I curtsied again and hurried from the room, my mind reeling. Elizabeth had died young, and mysteriously. What had happened to her? And what of her lover, the enigmatic Jay? As night fell, I knew sleep would elude me once again. The rose garden called to me, its secrets whispering on the evening breeze. I had to see it for myself, to walk where Elizabeth and her mysterious lover had once met in secret. Sneaking out after curfew was no small feat in a palace full of guards and watchful eyes. But years of navigating the servants' passages gave me an advantage, and soon I found myself stepping into the cool night air, the gravel of the garden path crunching softly beneath my feet. The rose garden was beautiful in the moonlight, the flowers pale ghosts of their daytime glory. As I wandered deeper into the maze of hedges and trellises, I could almost imagine two figures meeting here in secret, their whispered words of love carried away by the night wind. A sudden rustle behind me made me freeze. I turned slowly, my heart in my throat, to find myself face to face with a man I had never seen before. He was tall and imposing, dressed in the uniform of the palace guard, but there was something about his bearing that spoke of far greater authority. "Well, well," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "What do we have here? A little mouse, scurrying where she doesn't belong?" I opened my mouth to explain, to apologize, but no words came out. The man's hand moved to his belt, where a pistol gleamed in the moonlight. "I think," he said, his eyes cold as ice, "that you and I need to have a little chat about the dangers of curiosity, Miss Thorne." As he reached for me, I realized with a sickening clarity that my search for answers had led me into far greater peril than I could have ever imagined. The secrets of the past, it seemed, were not content to stay buried, and there were those who would stop at nothing to keep them hidden. My heart pounded in my chest as the imposing figure before me took another step closer. The moonlight glinted off his badge, not a mere palace guard, but someone of much higher rank. His eyes, cold and calculating, bore into mine as if trying to extract the very thoughts from my mind. "Come with me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Quietly. As he gripped my arm, I felt the weight of the locket against my skin, a reminder of the secrets I now carried. I knew I had a choice to make, one that could alter the course of my life forever. I'm sorry, sir," I stammered, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I was just taking a walk to clear my head. I didn't mean any harm." His grip tightened, and a humorless smile played at the corners of his mouth. "A walk, you say? In a restricted area? Well past curfew?" "I think not, Miss Thorne. You'll explain yourself to someone far above my pay grade." As he began to lead me away from the garden, my mind raced. Who was this man? How did he know my name? And more importantly, who was he taking me to? We moved swiftly through the shadowy corridors of the palace, our footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. I tried to memorize our path, but the twists and turns soon left me disoriented. Finally, we stopped before an ornate door I had never seen before, hidden away in a rarely used wing of the palace. The man knocked twice, then entered without waiting for a response. As we stepped inside, I had to stifle a gasp. The room was a study, but unlike any I had ever seen. The walls were lined with maps, documents, and photographs, many connected by red strings. In the center stood a massive desk, and behind it sat a figure that made my blood run cold. It was Mrs. Holloway, the head housekeeper, but gone was her usual stern demeanor. Here, she exuded an aura of power and authority that seemed entirely at odds with her role in the palace. "Ah, Captain Blackwood," she said, her eyes never leaving mine. "I see you've brought our little explorer. Thank you, you may go." The man, Captain Blackwood, released my arm and left without a word, closing the door behind him. The sound of the lock clicking into place felt like a death knell. Mrs. Holloway gestured to a chair in front of her desk. "Sit, Lucy. We have much to discuss." I sank into the chair, my legs trembling. Mrs. Holloway studied me for a long moment, her gaze so intense I felt as if she could see right through me. "You've been asking questions, Lucy," she finally said. "Dangerous questions, about things that are best left in the past." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Holloway. I was just—" "Don't lie to me," she cut me off sharply. "I know about the locket. I know you've been snooping in the library reading things you shouldn't. What I don't know is why." For a moment, I considered denying everything. But as I looked into Mrs. Holloway's eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected, a flicker of fear. Whatever secrets lay buried in the palace's past, they terrified even this formidable woman. In that instant, I made my decision. Taking a deep breath, I reached for the locket, pulling it out from beneath my uniform. "Mrs." Holloway's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "I found this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "in Her Majesty's wardrobe. I I know I should have turned it in, but something about it called to me. And then I found the note. And I had to know more. Mrs. Holloway was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the locket dangling from my hand. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, tinged with something that sounded almost like regret. You've stumbled into something far bigger than you can imagine, Lucy. A secret that has shaped the very foundation of this monarchy for generations. She stood, moving to a hidden safe behind one of the maps. From it, she withdrew a small leather-bound journal. As she placed it on the desk between us, I saw that its cover bore the same intricate design as the locket. Elizabeth was not just the Queen's great-aunt, Mrs. Holloway said, her fingers tracing the pattern on the journal. She was the true heir to the throne. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. But how? Why isn't she in the official records? Mrs. Holloway's laugh was bitter. Because, my dear, history is written by the victors. Elizabeth's claim to the throne was erased, her very existence nearly wiped from memory. As she spoke, she opened the journal, revealing pages filled with the same delicate handwriting I had seen in the locket. This is Elizabeth's diary. It tells a story of love, betrayal, and a conspiracy that reached to the very highest levels of power. I leaned forward, my eyes drinking in the words on the page. Elizabeth wrote of her secret love for a man named James, a commoner whose gentle heart and brilliant mind had captured her completely. But their love was doomed from the start. A princess could never marry a man of common birth. They planned to run away together, Mrs. Holloway continued, her voice distant as if lost in the past. To abandon their titles and live a simple life. But there were those who could not allow it. The scandal would have rocked the monarchy to its core. As I read on, my heart ached for Elizabeth and James. Their words spoke of a love so pure, so profound, that it seemed to leap off the pages. But with each entry, a sense of impending doom grew stronger. The final entry made my blood run cold. They're coming for us. James is dead, murdered to keep him silent. I fear I am next. If anyone finds this, know that what they've done is unforgivable. The truth must... The entry ended abruptly, a dark stain marring the bottom of the page. With a sickening clarity, I realized it was blood. I looked up at Mrs. Holloway, tears stinging my eyes. They killed them? To protect the monarchy? She nodded gravely. A decision made in desperation, by those who believed they were protecting something greater than themselves. But secrets have a way of festering, Lucy. Of poisoning everything they touch. As the weight of this knowledge settled over me, I realized I was faced with an impossible choice. Did I have a duty to expose this long-buried truth? Or would doing so only bring more pain, more destruction? Mrs. Holloway seemed to read my thoughts. The question now, Lucy, is what will you do with this information? Will you be the spark that sets fire to everything we've built? Or will you understand that sometimes secrets must remain buried for the greater good? As I sat there, the locket heavy in my hand and the ghosts of the past swirling around me, I knew that my answer would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire kingdom. The weight of Mrs. Holloway's question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. I found myself at a crossroads, torn between my sense of justice and the potential consequences of revealing such a monumental secret. I don't know, I finally whispered, my voice trembling. How can I possibly make that decision? Mrs. Holloway's expression softened slightly. Perhaps you don't have to, at least not yet. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small, ornate key. There's more to this story, Lucy. Much more. And I think it's time you saw it for yourself. She stood, gesturing for me to follow. We left the study, moving silently through the darkened corridors of the palace. Our journey took us deeper into the heart of the ancient building, down staircases I never knew existed, until we reached a heavy wooden door hidden behind a tapestry. Mrs. Holloway inserted the key, and with a groan of protest, the door swung open. Beyond lay a narrow passageway, lit only by the flickering flame of the lantern she had picked up along the way. "Watch your step," she warned as we descended a spiral staircase. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of damp stone and secrets long buried. At the bottom, we emerged into a circular chamber. Mrs. Holloway raised the lantern, illuminating the space, and I gasped. The walls were lined with portraits, faces I recognized from my studies of royal history, but also many I had never seen before. "Welcome, Mrs. Holloway said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space, "to the true history of our monarchy." As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I noticed something strange about the portraits. They were arranged in pairs. Each official royal portrait hung beside another, showing the same person in simpler attire, often with a completely different expression. "I don't understand," I murmured, moving closer to examine them. Mrs. Holloway's voice was low, almost reverent. "What you see here, Lucy, is the greatest secret of our kingdom. For generations, the royal family has maintained a tradition unlike any other, a tradition of duality." She guided me to a specific pair of portraits. One showed a regal king in full regalia, his expression stern and unyielding. The other depicted the same man in simple clothes, his face creased with laughter lines, eyes twinkling with warmth. "Every monarch," Mrs. Holloway explained, "has led a double life. One as the ruler the public sees, bound by duty and tradition. The other, a secret life of freedom, where they can experience the world as ordinary citizens." My mind reeled at the implications. "But why?" "To maintain balance," she said simply. "To ensure that those who rule never lose touch with those they rule over. It's a sacred trust, passed down through the generations." As we moved through the gallery, Mrs. Holloway revealed the hidden histories behind each pair of portraits. Kings who spent their days passing laws, and their nights working as craftsmen in the city. Queens who ruled with an iron fist by day, and volunteered in orphanages by night. Then we came to Elizabeth's portrait. Unlike the others, hers stood alone. The image of a young woman with eyes full of sorrow and defiance. "Elizabeth discovered the truth about her family's dual lives," Mrs. Holloway said softly. "But she wanted more than just secret forays into the world of commoners. She wanted to fully embrace that life, to abandon her royal duties entirely." "For love," I whispered, thinking of James. Mrs. Holloway nodded. Her decision threatened to expose everything. The council panicked. Her voice faltered for a moment. "They made a terrible choice." The gravity of the situation hit me anew. The murder of Elizabeth and James wasn't just about preventing a scandal. It was about protecting a centuries-old secret that shaped the very foundation of our kingdom's governance. As we stood there, surrounded by the hidden faces of history, a thought struck me. "Mrs. Holloway," I said slowly, "why are you showing me all this? Why trust me with such an enormous secret?" She turned to me, her eyes searching my face. "Because, Lucy, you've already proven yourself trustworthy. You found the locket, discovered secrets that could shake the kingdom to its core, and yet you didn't immediately expose them. You sought to understand." She paused, taking a deep breath. "And because we need your help." Before I could ask what she meant, the sound of footsteps echoed from the stairway. My heart leapt into my throat, fearing we'd been discovered. But Mrs. Holloway remained calm, a knowing look in her eyes. From the shadows emerged a figure I knew all too well, but in a way I'd never seen before. Gone were the elaborate gowns and regal bearing. Instead, she wore simple trousers and a woolen sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. It was the Queen. "Your Majesty," I gasped, dropping into a clumsy curtsy. "Please, Lucy," she said, her voice warmer than I'd ever heard it. "Here, I'm just Victoria." As I straightened, still in shock, Victoria smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression I'd never seen on her face before. "I believe Mrs. Holloway has explained our unique situation," she said, glancing around the portrait gallery. "What she may not have told you is that we're facing a crisis." Mrs. Holloway nodded gravely. "There are those within the government who have discovered our secret. They seek to expose it, to use it as leverage for their own gain. We need someone we can trust," Victoria continued. "Someone who can move between both worlds, the palace and the city, without arousing suspicion. Someone like you, Lucy." My head spun with the implications. Me? A simple chambermaid, trusted with a secret of this magnitude? "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Victoria's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of hope and determination. "We're asking you to become part of this tradition, to help us maintain the balance that has kept our kingdom stable for generations, to be our eyes and ears in places we cannot go. And," Mrs. Holloway added, "to help us uncover who is threatening to expose our secret before it's too late." As I stood there, surrounded by the hidden history of my nation, the weight of the locket seemed to burn against my skin. I realized that the mystery I had stumbled upon was far greater and more complex than I could have ever imagined. I thought of Elizabeth and James, of their tragic fate. I thought of the generations of monarchs who had lived double lives for the good of the kingdom. And I thought of the choice now laid before me, a choice that would irrevocably change my life and potentially the future of the entire nation. With a deep breath, I looked from Mrs. Holloway to Queen Victoria, my decision crystallizing in that moment. "I'll do it," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'll help you protect this secret." Little did I know that my agreement would plunge me into a world of danger, intrigue, and moral ambiguity beyond anything I could have imagined. The true test of my loyalty and my heart was only just beginning. The following weeks were a whirlwind of secrets and subterfuge. By day, I continued my duties as a chambermaid, but my eyes and ears were constantly alert, searching for any hint of the conspiracy threatening to expose the monarchy's dual nature. By night, I delved into a hidden world I never knew existed. Queen Victoria, or simply Victoria, as she insisted I call her during our clandestine meetings, proved to be a different person entirely when freed from the constraints of her public persona. She was witty, compassionate, and fiercely intelligent. Our late-night strategy sessions in the secret chamber became the highlight of my days, even as the weight of our task pressed heavily upon me. Mrs. Holloway, it turned out, was more than just the head housekeeper. She was the keeper of the royal secret, part of a long line of trusted advisors who had maintained this delicate balance for generations. Her network of informants throughout the palace and the city was impressive, and she wasted no time in putting my unique position to use. But as I moved between two worlds, I found myself increasingly torn. The more I learned about the dual lives of the monarchs, the more I understood the importance of maintaining the secret. Yet, a small voice in the back of my mind couldn't help but wonder, was this deception truly for the greater good? Or was it a manipulation of the people, no matter how well-intentioned? These thoughts plagued me one evening as I made my way through the palace corridors, having just returned from a covert meeting with one of Mrs. Holloway's contacts in the city. Lost in thought, I nearly collided with Tom as I rounded a corner. "Lucy," he exclaimed, steadying me with a hand on my arm. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Where have you been disappearing to lately?" I felt a pang of guilt as I looked into his concerned eyes. Tom had been my closest friend since I arrived at the palace, and keeping secrets from him felt like a betrayal. "I've just been busy with extra duties," I lied, hating the ease with which the deception came to my lips. "Mrs. Holloway has me running all sorts of errands." Tom's brow furrowed. Lucy, I'm worried about you. You're not yourself lately. If something's wrong, you know you can tell me, right? For a moment, I was tempted to confide in him, to share the burden that had been weighing on me. But the memory of Elizabeth and James's fate stayed my tongue. How could I risk Tom's safety by involving him in this? I'm fine, Tom. Really, I assured him, forcing a smile. Just tired from all the extra work. He didn't look convinced, but before he could press further, a commotion from down the hall caught our attention. Raised voices echoed off the stone walls, and as we hurried towards the source, my blood ran cold as I recognized one of them, Captain Blackwood. I'm telling you, there's something going on right under our noses. Blackwood's voice was filled with barely contained fury. The Queen's behavior, the strange comings and goings, it all points to a conspiracy. As we peered around the corner, I saw Blackwood confronting a group of senior palace officials. His face was red with anger, a vein throbbing at his temple. Captain, these are serious allegations, one of the officials said, his voice strained. Do you have any proof? Blackwood's eyes darted around the corridor, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought he had spotted us. But his gaze moved on. Not yet, he growled, but I will, and when I do, I'll expose this whole rotten business no matter who goes down with it. As the group dispersed, Tom turned to me, his eyes wide. What was that all about? I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. I have no idea. Palace politics, I suppose. But inside, my mind was racing. Blackwood was getting closer to the truth. We were running out of time. That night, as I tossed and turned in my narrow bed, unable to sleep, a soft knock at my door jolted me to alertness. I opened it to find Mrs. Holloway, her face grave. We have a problem, she whispered. Come with me. She led me through the now familiar path to the secret chamber. As we entered, I was surprised to see not only Victoria, but also a man I didn't recognize. He was tall and distinguished, with silver-streaked hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. Lucy, Victoria said, her voice tense. This is Lord Ashbury, my most trusted advisor, and one of the few who knows our secret. Lord Ashbury nodded curtly. Miss Thorne, I've heard much about you. We've received word that Captain Blackwood is planning to make his move, Mrs. Holloway explained. He believes he has evidence of the dual lives and intends to present it to Parliament in 3 days' time. My heart sank. What kind of evidence? We're not sure, Victoria said, her composure slipping for a moment to reveal the worry beneath. But we can't take any chances. We need to find out what he knows and stop him before it's too late. Lord Ashbury stepped forward, his expression grim. I'm afraid we may need to take drastic measures. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? If Blackwood can't be dissuaded, he said slowly, we may need to ensure his silence by more permanent means. The implication hung heavy in the air. I felt as though the floor had dropped out from under me. You can't mean murder? Sometimes, Lord Ashbury said, his voice cold. Sacrifices must be made for the greater good. I looked from face to face, Mrs. Holloway's resigned expression, Victoria's conflicted one, Lord Ashbury's determination. In that moment, I realized that the moral quandary I had been grappling with paled in comparison to this. No, I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. There has to be another way. We can't become the very thing we're trying to prevent. If we resort to murder, how are we any better than those who killed Elizabeth and James? Victoria's eyes widened at my words, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the young, idealistic princess she must have once been. Lucy's right, she said softly. We cannot compromise our principles, even in the face of exposure. Lord Ashbury's jaw tightened. Then what do you suggest we do? We're running out of options and time. All eyes turned to me, and I felt the weight of their expectations pressing down. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. There had to be a solution, a way to preserve the secret without resorting to violence. And then, like a bolt of lightning, an idea struck me. It was dangerous, potentially disastrous, but it just might work. "I have a plan," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But you're not going to like it." As I began to outline my idea, I saw a mix of hope and trepidation dawning on their faces. Little did I know that my plan would set in motion a chain of events that would test not only my loyalty, but the very foundations of the monarchy itself. The night before Captain Blackwood was set to present his evidence to Parliament, I found myself standing in the shadows of the palace gardens, my heart pounding in my chest. The plan we had concocted was risky, bordering on madness, but it was our last hope. I checked my pocket watch, a gift from Victoria for this very occasion. 11:55 p.m. He would be here soon. As if on cue, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path. Captain Blackwood emerged from the darkness, his face a mask of suspicion. "Miss Thorne," he said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "I must admit, I was surprised to receive your message. What could a simple chambermaid possibly have to tell me that's so important?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "I know about the dual lives of the monarchs, Captain, and I can prove it to you." His eyes widened, then narrowed. "If this is some sort of trick—" "No trick," I interrupted, pulling out the locket, the very one that had started this whole journey. "This belonged to Princess Elizabeth. It contains proof of the secret she died to protect. But there's more. So much more. And I'll show you all of it, on one condition." "And what's that?" Blackwood asked, his curiosity clearly piqued. "You hear the whole story, from the beginning. You see everything I've seen, and then you make your decision about what to do with the information." For a long moment, Blackwood studied me, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "Lead the way, Miss Thorne." With my heart in my throat, I guided him through the secret passage to the hidden chamber. As we descended the spiral staircase, I could feel the weight of centuries pressing down upon us. The chamber was dimly lit when we entered, the portraits on the walls casting long shadows. But we weren't alone. Victoria stood in the center of the room, dressed not in her royal finery, but in the simple clothes of her alter ego. Blackwood's hand flew to his sword. "What is the meaning of this?" "Captain Blackwood," Victoria said, her voice calm but filled with authority. "Welcome to the true heart of the monarchy." Over the next hour, we laid it all out for him. The centuries-old tradition of dual lives, the purpose behind it, the sacrifices made to maintain it. Victoria shared personal stories of her experiences living among her people, the insights she had gained, the policies she had shaped based on her first-hand knowledge of her subjects' lives. I could see the conflict in Blackwood's eyes as he struggled to reconcile his duty with this new reality. "But it's a deception," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "A lie told to the very people you claim to serve." "Is it a lie to seek understanding?" I asked softly. "To strive to be a better ruler by walking in the shoes of those you govern?" Victoria stepped forward, her eyes meeting Blackwood's. "Captain, I swore an oath to serve my people to the best of my ability. This tradition has allowed generations of monarchs to do just that. We've lived among our subjects, felt their joys and sorrows firsthand. It has made us better rulers, more compassionate leaders." Blackwood shook his head, clearly torn. "And what of Princess Elizabeth? Was her death truly necessary?" A pained expression crossed Victoria's face. "Elizabeth's fate is our greatest shame, a terrible mistake born of fear and desperation. It is a burden we carry, a reminder of what happens when we lose sight of our purpose." As dawn began to break, painting the chamber in soft light, Blackwood finally spoke. "I joined the palace guard to serve the crown and protect the people. I thought exposing this secret was the right thing to do. But now?" He trailed off, looking around at the portraits of monarchs past. "I'm not so sure." "The choice is yours, Captain," I said gently. "In a few hours, you're scheduled to present your evidence to Parliament. You could expose everything, end a tradition that has shaped our kingdom for generations. Or I could protect it," he finished, his voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. We all knew that whatever Blackwood decided in this moment would change the course of history. Finally, he straightened, his decision evident in the set of his shoulders. "Your Majesty," he said, addressing Victoria formally for the first time since entering the chamber, "I believe I owe you an apology and a renewed vow of service." The relief in the room was palpable. Victoria's eyes shone with unshed tears as she extended her hand to Blackwood. "Your loyalty honors us, Captain, and your integrity does you credit." As Blackwood took her hand, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We had done it. The secret was safe. But as I watched Victoria and Blackwood talking quietly, a new resolve formed within me. The old ways had brought us to this precipice. Perhaps it was time for a change. "Your Majesty," I said, stepping forward, "if I may make a suggestion." Both turned to look at me, curiosity in their eyes. "This secret has protected the monarchy, yes, but it has also isolated you. Perhaps it's time to bridge the gap. Not to expose everything, but to bring more people into the fold. To create a network of trusted individuals who can help facilitate your interactions with the public, who can provide more diverse perspectives." Victoria considered this for a long moment. "It would be a significant change," she mused, "but perhaps one whose time has come." She turned to Blackwood. "Captain, would you be willing to be part of such a network?" Blackwood straightened, a newfound purpose in his bearing. "It would be my honor, Your Majesty." As we left the chamber that morning, the first rays of sunlight streaming through the palace windows, I felt a profound sense of change in the air. The monarchy would evolve, adapting to the changing times while holding true to its core purpose of serving the people. My journey had begun with a simple locket, a curiosity that led me down a path I could never have imagined. Now, standing at the threshold of a new era, I realized that the greatest adventures often start with the smallest of discoveries. As we parted ways, Victoria caught my hand. "Thank you, Lucy," she said softly. "You've not only saved our secret, but you've helped shape our future." I smiled, thinking of all that had led to this moment, the risks, the doubts, the difficult choices. "Sometimes," I replied, echoing the words I'd read in Elizabeth's journal, "the most important duty is to question tradition, to seek a better way." As I walked back to my quarters, the weight of the locket against my chest felt different now. Not a burden of secrets, but a reminder of the power of truth, compassion, and the courage to change. The sun rose fully over the palace, marking the dawn of a new day and a new chapter in our kingdom's history. And I, Lucy Thorne, once a simple chambermaid, now stood ready to play my part in shaping that future.